Good morning. Glad to be talking to you all this morning. Before we get into our lesson, I got a little bit of quick information I need to make sure that you have. If you're watching this, it's probably on Sunday, September 13th. And today, on September 13th, we are resuming all of our normal service times at the building. Just so you know and you are aware, we'll be meeting on Sunday mornings for Bible class at 9:30. We'll have our normal 10:30 worship service. Then we'll have our evening service at 5. And we'll also be starting back to our 6:30 service on Wednesday nights. That's all going to start on September 13th, and we'll just be doing that from now till, whenever. That's the current plan. So just want to make sure you're aware we will be starting services back full time this Sunday. That being said, this morning we're going to finish up our series in Ephesians. And as I was thinking about this lesson, I want to share kind of a little thought with you. I was thinking about tools this week. I put together a weed eater for me and Sarah. We got one recently, and when it came in with this little bitty Allen wrench to loosen a few of the screws in it so I could put the shaft of it together. And this thing was really small and wobbly, this little bitty Allen wrench. It's just a free tool they put in there to assemble it. But I'll tell you what, it's amazing the difference between having the right tool for the job and not having it in pretty much any circumstance. Because these screws that I used this Allen wrench on, I tried to turn them with my hand, and they were smooth and small and circular. And my hand could not turn them at all. I feel like I could have spent hours trying to turn those things with my fingers and it never would have worked. But this little cheap Allen wrench, I put that in there and they just turn. It's easy as breathing. This tiny cheap piece of metal makes all the difference. And there's so many different tasks like that in life. As human beings, we're kind of known for our ability to use tools. That's one of the things that makes us able to do all the things that we do. Think about washing dishes. I do that a lot at our house, and the difference when you got a pan that's got a bunch of stuck-on food, it makes when you have either just a washcloth or when you got you a good scrub brush, and you can just get all that mess off of there. I think about even getting to church on Sunday. I could walk to church on Sunday from where my house is, but having that car, having transportation makes a huge difference. There are some tasks that are just not realistic to do without the right equipment. This is really the focus of the ending of Paul's book of Ephesians. He's told us about God's plan to save us and our part in that plan. So Paul ends the book by wrapping all these things together in a final warning about the biggest obstacle that we are going to face in the Christian life, the biggest obstacle to success. And he's told us what we ought to do, how we need to behave. Now he addresses what will make or break our ability to be part of God's plan. Ephesians has been all about forming Christian identity. In chapters 1 through 3, we learned about the blessings God's given to those that believe and the power that God has. Chapters 1 through 3 are all about teaching us who God is. And this idea of who God is where we gain ideas about what it means to serve God. We got to know who God is to know what he wants. That's what Paul does in Ephesians 1 through 3. In chapters 4 through 6, Paul focuses on us, on maintaining the unity of God's people since he united us through Christ, about how much better it is to live a life with God than to live a life without God. And finally, as we looked at last week, he talks about how a Christian household should look. And he ends the book after giving us all this information with one final plea. Knowing all these things, having formed this idea in our head of what a Christian is and what they do, we have to stand firm. We have to take this knowledge that Paul has given us and use it. We need this knowledge because Paul tells us we're going to war. We need to know who we are fighting for and what we are fighting against. Because if we do not have a sense of identity, we are not going to be able to stand against the enemy. Let's start reading in Ephesians 6 in verse 10, and we'll read down to about verse 13 to start. It says, "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm." First, I love the first word here in verse 10. My translation says finally, yours probably does too, but the idea here in Greek is not so much like finally as it is from now on, from this point, finally, from this point forward. It carries this idea of for now, for the rest of your life. You've got the information, the basic information about being a Christian. So from now on, Paul tells us this is what you need to do. Be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put simply, Paul's saying, hold on to God. Now that you know who he is, hold on to him and know that he is the source of your ability to deal with your struggles. You're not strong enough on your own. That's why you need his strength and his might. Just like I couldn't tighten that screw without a wrench or untighten it or work with it at all, you need God's power. So Paul tells us to put on that power, to wear it as armor. Then you can stand against the schemes of the devil. I love verse 12 because he focuses on what our enemy is. What is this thing we're going to war with? Why do we need this armor? It isn't people or a person. We're not going to war with other people because other people are potential Christians. They're God's children too. We want to bring them into the fold of God's people. Even if we disagree with them, they are all potential allies, people that could follow God. No, we're going to war with something bigger than that. Our enemy is the devil and the spiritual force of evil. Now, I'm not going to try to perfectly explain what the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places work, how that all works. But I think what we're supposed to take from Paul here is that there is evil in the world. And evil is what corrupts people. It's what corrupts us. The only way to stand against that evil is to have the power of God, to wear his armor. And so Paul tells us, take it up. Wear it so that you can withstand on the evil day, and having put it on, you can stand firm. And you may have noticed, as we're looking at this text, that there is a key word that keeps popping up here. We see stand kind of 3 times through here. Paul wants us specifically, he doesn't say win or defeat the devil, he says stand in the evil day. Stand against the schemes of the devil. And so we need to have a good idea, what does stand mean? Some people have read this as Christians should always be on the offensive. We should adopt an offensive stance against evil in the world. Try to attack the evils of our world head on. Some have read this and thought, well, he's talking about defense. He's saying we need to be trying to protect the victory that Jesus has won and the church and the gospel. But in reality, we actually have a pretty good idea what Paul means when he says stand, because we have other ancient texts that use this same word in Greek in a military sense. And that kind of explains to us, well, what is standing according to a person who lived in Paul's time in a military context? Well, for Greeks, the idea of standing during a battle was not about an offensive or defensive stance. Instead, standing was about having the resolve to remain in the battle. The opposite of standing is not defending or attacking. The opposite of standing is running away. Standing is what you do when you don't run away from the battlefield. Here's a quote from an ancient Greek historian describing General Brasidas at the Battle of Thermopylae. Now, you don't have to know who General Brasidas is or when the Battle of Thermopylae is. It's just a battle that took place before Jesus lived and used Greek language and this same Greek word. Listen to how General Brasidas, talks about standing. He says, "These men will not stand before us. They show it by the wagging of their spears and of their heads. Men who do that are never prepared for an attack. Let us boldly get at them as quickly as possible." And the Athenians were thrown into confusion and fled. I wonder if sometimes the devil looks at me and kind of thinks like that. I see John, he is wavering and weak. People are never able to stand against me when they feel that way. I will attack him and he will fall like a deck of cards. It doesn't matter. It matters what Paul meant by this word, because Paul is using a military term to teach us a military lesson. In the ancient world, here's how you win a battle. You don't win a battle by killing everybody on the enemy team, you know. You win a battle when your two armies come against each other. They're both going to have a front line. And the only goal you really have is to break the enemy front line. If you can get one guy to run away because of how scary your army is, then you've opened up a hole in the enemy defense. And then his friend's going to run because he's got nobody to watch his back. And soon enough, you defeated the entire army because you've broken the line. They've broken formation. They've not been able to stand against your attack. And so the idea Paul is giving us is that as soldiers of God, we've got to stand. We've got to work with the rest of God's army. We've got to help and attack and defense. If a soldier can't stand in battle, they endanger not only themselves, but their whole cause. Our number one goal as Christians is to keep fighting the good fight, to stay in the battle. Our whole life as Christians is going to be this series of conflicts, not against others, but against the devil. Just like Jesus' own life is filled with these struggles against evil chasing after him. From Satan himself tempting in the wilderness, to continuous evil attitudes and actions against him by the Pharisees and many others during his lifetime. Almost every story of Jesus, he's going somewhere and being challenged by other people, attacked or struggling. We can expect that same thing in our own life. Satan's going to come after him, or after us. And if we could just keep fighting and not flee completely from our relationship with God, then we've secured the victory. Let's keep reading and finish up this text in verses 14 through about verse 18. It says, "Stand therefore, having fastened on the belt of truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and as shoes for your feet, having put on the readiness given by the gospel of peace. In all circumstances, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, praying at all times in the Spirit with all prayer and supplication to that end. Keep alert with all perseverance, making supplication for all the saints." How do we stand in battle against the devil? We need the right tools. We begin with truth, the belt that holds all things together in the armor of God. You know, when he says truth here, I think he's not so much talking about what we might think of as the truth, like the Word of God is the truth. That is the sword of the Spirit, as he'll get to a little bit later. I think when he says truth here, what he's talking about is more what we might think of as character or honesty. You know, we begin by genuinely, from our heart, using our best judgment and our best knowledge of God to serve him. We begin serving with sincerity and honesty, not putting on a show, not not just acting it out, but by doing our best, our genuine best in our service to God. I think that's what it means to be wearing the belt of truth. It's honest character. We continue from there and we put on righteousness, which we only receive through Christ. And it is righteousness that protects our vital organs, our spiritual heart. Our feet are ready for battle because they know we're carrying the gospel of peace. We carry with us the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, and the sword of truth. Now, Paul's continuing to really dive into the military imagery here. It's like Paul spent some time around some Roman soldiers and really knows what's going on there and wants to use that metaphor all through here. Because a Roman soldier would have actually put on his gear, and this is essentially the kind of gear Roman soldiers wore. They would have put their gear on for battle the exact same order that Paul is describing to us here. They would have started with the belt and gone to the breastplate and so on and so forth. But they would have ended with this shield and helmet and sword, three of the most important parts of their gear. It's funny that Paul uses the term fiery darts to describe the attacks of the devil and the things that you use the shield to defend yourself from. Ancient Romans they had shields that were covered in leather, and they would soak that leather before the battle in water. It would absorb that water, and that would protect them from fire arrows. That was a main concern they had because they don't want to flee. They want to stand in the battle. Remember, that's the biggest concern to win a fight, is who's going to be standing firm on the front line. And the best way to get somebody to run away from the front line is to shoot their shield with fire and set them on fire. So the Romans were like, well, we better soak these things in some water because I don't want to get set on fire. Paul tells us that's what the shield of faith is like. When we have a strong belief in God, then when the devil attacks us, instead of cowering and running away because we have this assault on us, we can stand firm and keep facing him because God is with us. That's what faith is. Faith is, I believe that God is not making me fight the devil on my own. It is a shield of faith. He then talks about this sword, and I think it's really ironic here that he uses this term sword, because I said just last week that the Bible's not a hammer, it's not a weapon, it's a mirror with which we look at ourselves. It's not a hammer we use to attack others, and I think that's still true. But I think he uses this term sword, and it's funny because it's not a sword we're called to wield against other people. Remember, he said our enemies are not of flesh and blood. And in the middle of all this military imagery, he mentions that we carry a gospel of peace. We wield this sword against the spiritual forces of evil, against sin and death and the devil, and whatever forces of evil affect and twist the hearts of mankind. The Bible is our sword to beat back and destroy that force of corruption that fills our world. And in this context, I think Paul's talking less about preaching the gospel and more about our individual ability to use the Bible in combat with sin. To know God's word and to remember what it says. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I know I have. There's been times when I'm tempted to sin. And you know what happens? I've read the Bible. So I just hear the words of the Bible just ring through my head. I hear, John, love your neighbor. I know that you want to be mean to them. I know they've annoyed you. John, love your neighbor. You know better. I hear, John, have no other gods before me. Love me more than this. And it is that sword of the Spirit that cuts me, that reminds me who I am. And then I use it to fend off that temptation. I'm not perfect. I don't manage to do that every time, but it's amazing what happens when you say no to sin because you remember what God has told you. And the temptation just kind of fades away. At the heart of it, I think what Paul is telling us is that being a Christian is about our ability to stand. We are going to do battle with the evils of this world. And what is important is not that we win every single time. We're going to falter, we're going to struggle. What is important is that we do not fall down and retreat from God. It's that we do not let sin break us. This is the great failing that humankind always struggles with. We run away from God. From Moses to David, Satan gets after our hearts and he divides us from the Lord and from each other. And that's when he brings us down. We can't beat him on our own. He got Moses to reject God and strike the rock. He tempted David, the greatest king in Israel's history, into murdering a guy and stealing his wife. Satan's coming for us. And we as individuals are not strong enough to beat him. That's a fact. That's what the Bible teaches us. And so Paul tells us, well, what do? You need the right tool. Paul says, rely on God. He can beat the devil. Be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Wear his strength. Use his truth. And hold the line. Stand against the devil. Because here's a fact about the devil. He's a coward. He doesn't believe what he's doing. Resist the devil. You know what happens when you resist the devil according to James? When you resist temptation? Instead of you breaking line and fleeing, the devil will not be able to stand before you. He'll run away. He will flee from you. This is Paul's message to the Ephesians, his final message. You know what God has done. You know what he asks of you as a Christian. So be on guard for the enemy who will try to destroy you. Use what you know as a Christian. And you can send the devil fleeing from you just like Jesus did in his own temptation, using the armor of God and the sword of the Spirit. This morning, I don't know what's going on in your life, but I love you. And I hope that things are going well in your own battle with the devil. But if they're not, I want you to know that you don't fight on the front lines alone. God is with you, but you also got brothers to the left and brothers to the right in the church. And we want to help you in any way that we can. Just get in touch with us. Give me a call the elders, send us a message on Facebook, whatever you need. Just know that we love you and we want to help you in any way that we can. God bless you.